Last week, Pastor Mark started our new series, Own It, as Miriam was talking about before, really about this idea of ownership, taking responsibility for the house of God, for our lives, and for what God is doing in our lives and our cities and beyond. The key scripture for this series is Mark chapter 11. It's an account of Jesus going to church. It says in verse 15, on reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple. Last week's message was simply on those first few words, on reaching Jerusalem. If you haven't watched that message, or you've maybe here for the first time, you're watching online, you didn't even know about our church or anything like that, go back and watch last week's message, part 1 of Own It, because it was fantastic and it sets us up for today as well. It says, Jesus entered the temple area and he began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and he would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you've made it a den of robbers. This is a classic case of expectation versus reality. Have you ever experienced that? I'm sure you have. You only have to go online on social media to see the myriad of examples of when we have an expectation of something, but the reality is totally different. Some of the best ones I've ever seen are the epic cake fails. Anyone ever seen the cake fails online, the expectation versus reality? Come on, a YouTube tutorial that says everything that you're supposed to do does not always end in the same place as what you expect. I mean, cakes is one. For me, another one, DIY. I mean, I've tuned in to a really popular DIY channel, DIY Zasters, hosted by one of our senior team here at Audacious Church, Pastor Mark Foster, DIY Zasters. Check it out. And follow the instructions that seem to say exactly how to do something, and yet when I draw a perfect circle, it's more of a triangle, or it's more of a square. Because what we expect and what actually happens, there can be a gap between the two. Give me a wave right now, or give me a wave in the chat if you're watching online. If you've ever tried to do something with confidence and it's not exactly worked out exactly how you thought. Come on, I'm thinking of cakes, I'm thinking of DIY, I'm thinking of many, many things that we've attempted. Painting, that can't be that hard, can it? Just have to, dip it in the paint and then just paint a face, paint a man's face. It's easy to do, right? Except the tutorial person's face looks like a face, and my face looks like a dog's dinner. Not good. Expectation versus reality. Now, it's pretty funny when it's about something like a cake or, I don't know, DIY, as I've explained. But what about when expectation versus reality is about something a little bit more serious? I'm wondering if there's people in church today, as part of this service, and you've entered in, just like Jesus entered the temple, you've entered into things with a set of expectations, and the reality of what you found once you were in didn't match up your expectations. It's all good being a cake, but what about if it was, I don't know, getting married? Maybe you had an expectation, an idea in your heart and mind of what it is to get married, but once you got in, it was a little bit different. And let's face it, that's what marriage is, navigating the journey of a relationship that's evolving and changing. If you've got kids, just give me a wave. Come on, give me a wave in the chat as well. You're saying, yeah, I got kids. You're currently asking, why did you have so many? No, I'm joking, I'm sure you're not. One time we were on holiday in a caravan, and at that point we only had 2 children. We have 3 now. And I remember distinctly a conversation where my wife said to me about our 2 children, why did we have so many? I said, because they are like arrows in a quiver. I didn't really. I was like, I don't know, which one should we kick out? No, I'm joking. I didn't really. I remember pre-having children though, pre-having a baby, pre my firstborn, who happens to be sat over there on camera 6. I don't know what camera it is, I just made it up. 4, thank you, son. Yeah, you can applaud him. It's one of the best things I've ever done right there. Oh, you left the lens cap on, mate. Just take the... There's no lens cap, I'm just kidding. Before he was born, though, we had this idea, this expectation of what it'd be like to have a baby. It'd be so nice. We'd put the baby in the pram, we could go for a walk through the park. When we wake up in the morning, it'll just be there, cooing. That was right, cooing, not pooing. And we'll just pick him up and he'll be a dream. How many people know 6 weeks in, 3 o'clock in the morning, expectation versus reality, completely different. Jesus was so incensed by this mismatch of his expectation and what he saw in reality that he had to do something about it. You see, here's the thing. God takes church. God takes the house of God. Jesus takes the house of God seriously. I mean, it is a big deal to God how we are in and about his house. So much so that the Bible describes the church as the bride of Christ. I mean, you can mess with my car, you can mess with my house, you can mess with any of my stuff, but mess with my bride, and you will see a different version of me. And Jesus takes it serious because people are messing with what is so important. In fact, he actually spells out his expectation versus his reality. If he was on social media, he would have posted a meme that said expectation versus reality. Expectation, a house of prayer, a house of worship, a house of encounter, a house of divine exchange. Reality, a den of robbers. He's literally saying what we say on social media, but about the house of God in this verse. Jesus entered the temple, and that's all I'm speaking about for these next 15 minutes or so, is Jesus entering and that mismatch between expectation and reality. It's almost as if Jacob's revelation, I started by reading Genesis 28, the story of Jacob who wakes up from a dream and has this revelation of just how awesome the presence of God is, and says, I didn't realize it. I've been in the presence of God. In fact, it's like the house of God where God lives, and it's awesome. It's almost like, Jacob says, like a gateway, if you like the mouth of heaven is God's house. And that revelation was passed on for centuries, from generation to generation to generation, but somehow, as it was passed on, it was compromised and diluted to the point where Jesus, who is the Son of God and knows just how powerful and how awesome you, the church of God, is and are, was like, this is not what we meant. Like, don't you remember what Jacob said? Jesus is thinking, that revelation, what has happened to it? As it's been passed on from generation to generation, it's been diluted. And we ended up in a situation where worship became more about the worshiper than the worshipped. This message is called So Worship, and all of my points are kind of slightly long, over complex sentences because I wanted to get to the so worship. So the first thing you need to understand about worship this morning is worship is about the worshipped, not the worshiper. So worship. Worship is about the worshipped, Jesus, the King of Kings, name above all names. It's about him, not the worshiper, ... That's called an ellipsis, which means there's some text that could go there, but it's not as important as so worship. Jesus went to church and saw people going to church with an attitude of, what am I going to get from this experience, as opposed to, what can I give to this experience? Imagine the scene. this busy, imagine a trading floor. You know, these kind of scenes that you see on the news sometimes. You've got all the monitors and the screens and the numbers and the stats, and you've got people dressed in smart dress, but the tie's all pulled out, the shirt's half untucked. People got bits of paper in their hands, they're on the phones, they're trading, they're selling, they're buying. It's like that, but with sheep. Imagine that, but with like, I don't know, llamas running through it. I don't know if llamas were in the temple, but I'm just trying to get you to think. Imagine if we were doing this right now, but there were sheep and cattle and people buying and selling and shouting. Imagine the market on a Saturday morning where you're used to the sounds. Imagine all that, but with live animals. If you were a Gentile, a non-Jew, then this part of the temple is the only bit you were allowed in. So what's worse, if you can afford me the grace to say this, for Jesus, is that not only are people coming to church with the wrong motive, but the people who are not Jews, they don't understand this. That's the only bit that they see. The bit that they see, and we can say things like, well, you know what? God looks at the heart, and man looks at the outward appearance. God looks at the heart is really helpful, especially if you're having a bad hair day or you've got a spot on the end of your nose. But the other part of that verse is also important, because it says man looks at the outward appearance. And there were some men and women coming to church, let's just put it in the context of today, who weren't Christians, and yet all they could see was what the Jews, for this illustration, the Christians, were showing on the outside, which was nothing to do with Jacob's revelation about how awesome is this place. Come on, worship is not about you, it's about the person that we're worshiping. Bible says in Psalm 100 verse 4, enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. And yet, over the centuries, we find ourselves in a place where we can leave church and say things like, well, I didn't get much out of the service today. I mean, that is a trader who goes in with sheep, and his main goal or incentive is to sell, so in order to get, walking out with the same sheep, or maybe just, you know, I've only gotten rid of one or two, and goes on going, oh, I didn't get much out of this experience today. Jesus is like, that's not the point. The point is you come in with thanksgiving in your heart and you give everything you have in praise to God. Let's face it, we all have plenty of excuses and reasons why we could not worship. Yeah, but do you know the week I've had might be echoing around our hearts and minds as we drive to church or make our way to the laptop, if you like, and you're watching online. Yeah, but the thing is, I don't really like this song. So, you know, I've got my reasons, and you can put your own reason in space of that ellipsis, ... But whatever it is, so worship. Yeah, but I'm really tired, ... So worship. Yeah, but it's not my style. So worship. Romans 12 says this in verse 1 and 2, and it's amazing. It says, here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life. This is where we're moving from worship to being a singing experience to the heart of worship. It says, take your ordinary, everyday life. You're sleeping, you're eating, going to work, walking around life. None of that involved singing. And place it before God as an offering. So it's okay to have your reasons and your excuses. It's okay for me to come to church a bit tired, as long as in that moment I go, you know what, I'm tired. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna worship. Why? Because it's a sacrifice of praise. Because it's an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing that you can do for him. In other words, just remember what God's done for you no matter how tired you are. In other words, just remember what God is doing for you right now, regardless of how offended you might be. Regardless of your current reality, remember what God has done for you. That's the best thing that you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it, unlike the culture around you always dragging you down to its level of immaturity. God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. The second thing about worship, and in a moment the band are going to come and join me and we're going to stand and give God everything we can. But the second thing is this: worship is about the worshipped, not worship. So worship. Now, if you didn't get anything from that, just get so worship. But what I'm talking about here is how frustrating or at times hilarious it is when someone completely misses the point. There is no better place than that than Decathlon. Decathlon prides itself on supplying over 70 sports. And you can watch the Olympics and then go and buy a curling brush. You can go and buy an archery set with all the best intentions of in the world. But there's something about a person who has all the gear but no idea. I'm talking Lycra and crisps. I'm talking running gear, donuts. It's like, you missed the point. You like the idea of being healthy. You've got all the stuff and the trappings of being healthy. You've bank balances reduced by those 175-pound running trainers, but you just wearing them to drive to the school run is what we call missing the point. The reality is, when it comes to church and it comes to the house of God, we can get so caught up with the business of worship, so get caught up with worship itself, that we forget that it's not about worship, it's about the worshipped. The liturgy that we have is supposed to facilitate or point towards, or at least lead us to a destination of Jesus, the King of Kings. And we can argue and fight and get offended over the liturgy and the instruction and the fabric, if you like, of worship. All the while, Jesus is going, what are you doing? You're missing the point. It's the equivalent of going straight from the gym to Greg's. Let me read this to you. I don't know if you've ever read it. It's in Isaiah. It's in the Message. It says this: quit your worship charades. I can't stand your trivial religious games. Monthly conferences, weekly Sabbaths, special meetings. I'm reading it. I know I sometimes do, but I am reading it. I can't stand one more meeting for this, meeting for that. I hate them. You've worn me out. I'm sick of your religion. While you just go right on and sin. When you put on your next prayer performance, I'll be looking the other way. No matter how long or loud or often you pray, I'll not be listening. And you know why? Because you've been tearing people to pieces and your hands are bloody. Go home, wash up, clean up your act, sweep your lives clean, so I don't have to look at that any longer. Say no to wrong, learn to do good, work for justice, help the down and out, stand up for the homeless, go to bat for the defenseless. Well, that's just the Old Testament. That's just the Old Testament reader. You're just talking about the Old Testament. Well, listen to this in the New Testament. Paul says to Timothy, mark this: there will be terrible times in the last days. People will have a form of godliness. In other words, they'll have the business of God. They'll know about God. They'll do God, but deny its power. Have nothing to do with them or that. Guys, we have to own it when it comes to worship. when it comes to presenting our lives in a way that brings glory and honor to God, not for our benefit, but so that we can be a huge mirror or signpost, if you like, that says, hey, look at God. Let's face it, if we don't, the stones will. It's what the Bible says. Jesus said, I tell you, because some people are worshiping, and there's some other people, religious people, come along and say, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. And Jesus said, listen, I'll tell you this, if they keep quiet, the stones will just cry out anyway. That's called understanding what Jacob understood and put it into those words when he said, surely this is the house of God. It's awesome. And the Bible goes on to say it again and again and again. Psalm 122 verse 1 says, I was glad when they said to me, let's go to church. It's to the house of the Lord. I just changed that bit, but I'm trying to summarize. And then used all the time. I saved summarizing by explaining that I summarized. Classic Reedy. Psalm 84 verse 10 basically says, I would rather be in God's house. That's only said by someone who understands worship. It's not about worship, it's about worshipped. Worship is not about worshiper, it's about worshipped. The third thing about worship is that worship, even though it's not about you, it's like respiration for the worshiper. ... So worship. Something amazing happens when you come to church, when you come to God, ready with a sacrifice of praise. Even though it's not a business transaction, it is almost like a divine exchange takes place. I don't know if you know what the human respiration system is or does, but it's unbelievably miraculous. When you take a breath in through your nose, the air goes into your lungs, and in these sort of sacs at the end of your lungs, I watched a YouTube tutorial. I could tell you what they're called, but that would be a step too far. What happens is this unbelievable exchange. It's a gas exchange. As the blood sort of passes over this area, all the oxygen is passed into the blood, and all the carbon dioxide is passed back into the lungs. And what happens is you breathe out all the poison and all the toxin, but the oxygenated blood then flows around your body, pumped by your heart, sending life-giving oxygen to every single part of your body. That is awesome. And you do it all day, every day. Out with the toxins, in with the life. That's exactly what happens when you come into the presence of God. Proverbs 18:16, the band can come and join me, says this: a gift opens the way and ushers the giver into the presence of the great. And so when you come to God with a gift of praise, with a sacrifice of praise, with a gift of worship, God, it literally ushers you into his presence, and there this divine exchange takes place. All the toxins, all the offense, all the hurt, all the selfish kind of indulgent, focused on you stuff just is metaphorically breathed out. And what you breathe in his presence is life-giving to your soul. The last thing as we come into land is that worship is eternal. So worship. There's nothing in your current reality that is more permanent than worship. Now, I'm not suggesting your current reality is not serious or meaningful or impacting or a big deal. But worship is eternal. I don't know that heaven will be one everlasting 24/7 prayer and worship service. I don't know about that. But whatever we do in heaven, and maybe like Pastor Glenn's vision of heaven, as he's told us many times, is playing cricket with his dad. I tell you what the soundtrack will be. Worship. I don't know if it'll be a worship meeting, but whatever you do in heaven, the soundtrack will be worship. And the reason why I know is because it's already worship, and it already has been worship, and it always will be worship. The Bible teaches us in Revelation that angels and human history, those who have gone to heaven, are worshiping God. And so when you choose to step in, like Jesus entered the temple area, when you are aware of what you're entering in when you come into God's presence, you join with all of heaven. You join with something that will last longer than your offense. You join with something that will last longer than your pain, longer than your unemployment, longer than your relational breakdown. It will last longer, ... So worship. I wonder how many people in this service right now are offended. And let's face it, there's a lot of stuff going on that is offensive. People mistreat people, people let people down. Your expectations aren't met, and reality doesn't match up. But I want you to respond in this moment. Because if you're offended, then you can add, for now, ... so worship. Because offense is for now. And you can get out of it. But worship is forever. In fact, if you want to get out of it, if you want to get out of something temporary, focus on something that's eternal. The Bible teaches us that. Don't fix your eyes on what you can see. Yeah, but they left me, so now I'm hurting. Yeah, that's real and it's serious. But it's only for now. Because you can get out of it. So worship. I'm lonely for now. So worship. I'm skint, I'm bored, I'm stressed at the moment. So worship. We can't even sing at the moment. Yeah, at the moment. So worship. Everything's changed. But it always will. So worship. My marriage is failing as far as I can see, but there's more than what I can see. So worship.